Today is November 12th, 2021, and yesterday was the conclusion of the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Glasgow, called COP26. The summit aspired to assemble worldwide resources and systems that would protect our global communities and natural habitats. For those of us who did not go to Glasgow, but who are nonetheless concerned about the environment, knowing what actions to take can be overwhelming. Where do we start? Paper straws? Recycling? Minimizing plastics? How do we use our own interests and work within our own communities to create awareness? For me, the answer was trees. Believing strongly that everyone has a story about or connection to a tree, my producer, Jonathan Zoutner, and I asked ourselves, what if we created a space for people to share their stories about trees? Would telling stories about something we have in common allow us to connect with new perspectives and ideas? And most of all, could we also learn to listen to the trees themselves and the wisdom that they have to offer? These questions and more are what led to this very podcast. My name is Dory Robinson, and I am your host for Tree Speech, a podcast where we get to know one another and our world, one tree at a time. Our second season has been guided by the theme, Speaking for the Trees. This phrase may sound familiar. It is inspired by Dr. Seuss's The Lorax. Published 50 years ago in 1971, this children's book tells the story of a forest-dwelling creature, the Lorax, and the developer who destroys the Lorax's natural environment to the point of depletion, causing all the animals of the area to migrate away. The book captures the impact of industrialization and pollution on an ecosystem and the subsequent effect on a whole community. In this season of Tree Speech, we aim to amplify specific stories of culturally and historically relevant trees, including the truffula tree, of course, and to speak with activists, artists, and scientists who, like the Lorax, speak for the trees so as to protect and champion them. One such person is science educator David Meshoulam, co-founder and executive director of Speak for the Trees, a Boston area nonprofit founded in 2018. Working at the intersection of environmental justice, racial and social equity, public health, and climate change, Speak for the Trees strives to build a more equitable urban forest throughout Boston. And with a name like that, we knew we needed to feature this organization on our show. Now, when we speak about trees and forests, what do you picture? Many people, me included, imagine secluded and country areas. However, over 141 million acres of America's forests are in cities and towns. It surprised me too. These urban forests can include parks, street trees, landscaped boulevards, gardens, promenades, greenways, wetlands, and nature preserves, all of which form the green infrastructure on which communities depend. I spoke with David about many things, including how he transitioned from teaching high school science to running this organization, the programs he has been integral in implementing, and what he believes is most important in addressing our present-day challenge of climate change. Our conversation took place over Zoom. He was in the Speak for the Trees offices, the sounds of energetic work and laughter in surrounding offices faintly audible in the background. David was also energetic and passionate. Before we listen to the interview, let's take a deep breath together so that we can be as grounded as the trees we speak about. First, blow out all your air and inhale deeply. Then let it out slowly. Let's listen. Well, David, thank you so much for joining us today. It's really a pleasure to have you.
Well, thank you for hosting me. The pleasure is all mine.
David, tell me, where did your love and passion for trees begin?
Well, You have to ask my parents that. I mean, I think I've always been connected to trees. They tell stories about me walking down the block and that taking hours to just walk down a block because I'd stop and look at every leaf. So I've always loved trees. I think a lot of us have an intimate connection with trees. It's just a matter of recognizing it.
Yeah, I agree. So that love obviously grew and grew and grew. And you co-founded Speak for the Trees in 2018. And since this wasn't so long ago, can you tell us why this particular time seemed like the right time?
So it actually was percolating in my mind probably around 2016 or so. I was teaching high school science. I just finished my doctorate in science education and was teaching a really fun class with a history teacher called Science and Society. So my take on science and my love of science actually is rooted in the humanistic side of science. So the relationship between science and culture and people and history. And 2016 feels like a world ago, but it was during the midst of a pretty contentious presidential election. And the threat of climate change was ever growing. And I was also entering a new decade, of which I will not speak. And and I just felt like I was at this point in my life where I had to decide, what was important to me. And I was working with some students on this project around engagement and science and culture. And they were doing these fun projects. And I thought maybe I should do a project too. So I started thinking about all these things that were happening in our society. And I thought, we're really just not talking to each other anymore. We're really like all on our phones, in our echo chambers, on Facebook. And I think the election was just a manifestation of that. And I thought, where is our place for us to be connected where we can sort of start seeing each other again? A public space. And I landed on this thing called a tree. And it became a civics project of like connecting people. And it also became an environmental calling of like, how do you get people involved in talking to each other about things that concern them? So I sort of went down that rabbit hole. And I sort of thought I was losing my mind talking about urban forestry, which I actually didn't know at the time existed, such a field. But I started seeing these nonprofits in big cities in urban forestry. And I found one in Los Angeles was the first one I found called Tree People. And I found one in San Francisco and one in Seattle. And I was like, oh, that's cool. It must be a West Coast thing. And then I started digging around and I found that they were all over the country. And every major city had a nonprofit in urban forestry, except for Boston and except for Las Vegas. So I said, Las Vegas? Okay, I get that. But why Boston? So I decided around 2017 or 2018, I met my colleague, Amanda Rich. We decided to take the plunge together. So we co-founded this organization.
That is extraordinary. The idea that you met your colleague and immediately had enough synchronicity that you were ready to go and co-found a project together.
It was serendipity, and serendipity favors those who are prepared. Amanda was transitioning out of her career and had just finished her degree over at Harvard at the Graduate School of Education. And she actually did this study on trees and the benefits of trees and was looking at sustainability. And we just hit it off.
Oh, that's perfect. That's perfect. Also, as a fellow educator, I absolutely love the fact that you said, maybe I should do a project too. I think that's just so great. So could you describe the work that Speak for the Trees does?
Yeah, I mean, at the core of our mission are a couple of things, but I think that really the core is like, how do we transform how people think about and relate to trees in Boston? So valuing trees for what they are, not just an object, but actually a thing that makes us feel whole, that makes our lives, enriches our public health, connects us to each other. And then also a thing that connects us to a larger movement around equity. And equity, we really frame pretty broadly, public health equity, economic equity, environmental justice, but also climate change and global climate change, and thinking about how the environmental movement, for all its successes, has also had a big blind spot, which is thinking about the environment as being separate from us and being something out there. and how we have missed opportunities to engage people in being part of those conversations. So a local tree is an invitation, an extension into a larger conversation around what we can do together to connect to each other and connect and heal Mother Earth.
This phrase, a local tree is an invitation to a larger conversation, is a really great one and really brings these enormous ideas and these enormous challenges and makes them very, very personal, which is, of course, the way to engage people. You were mentioning different forms of equity. What is tree equity?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways to think about tree equity, and we borrow this term or we incorporate the term from American Forest, which is a wonderful, they claim they're the oldest environmental nonprofit in the country. They were founded in the late 1800s. So tree equity is two things. It's first the unequal distribution of trees in our urban landscape. The tree distribution, you might imagine, runs along racial and economic lines. So people who live in wealthier neighborhoods, people with more privilege, more access to resources, tend to have more tree canopy coverage. And that brings along with it a lot of health benefits, a lot of economic benefits, mental well-being. And people who live in more marginalized communities or less empowered have fewer trees. So that's one side of tree equity. And I think we all have that sense when we drive from one neighborhood to another. We can sort of look around and we can figure out the well-being of that community oftentimes by its tree canopy coverage. And that's actually traced to things like redlining, right? So it's a systemic problem that's been around for decades. The other side of tree equity is who has access to the workforce opportunities in the industry. And they tend to be white men who tend to work in tree care. So these are good paying jobs. These are local jobs. These are jobs that are in need and demand. And I think really empowering jobs where people can give back to their community. So how do we create those opportunities not only to plant more trees and care for the trees we have, but how do we ensure that the economic opportunity that goes along with that also stays in the community and people who are serving their own community? So those are sort of the two ways that we frame tree equity at our organization.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Like how Speak for the Trees works towards tree equity in Boston?
So we have a couple of different lenses we put on when we do our tree equity work. I think on the most basic level, we're data driven. So we have maps we use the map actually that was recently developed by American Forest. You can go to treeequityscore.org and look at that map and get a sense of where trees are most needed. But actually before American Forest came out with their tree equities tool, we worked with a graduate student at BU named Raquel Jimenez, who created a tree equities tool for us, which is slightly different. And it allows us to overlay issues related to environmental health. So things like heat islands and air pollution with demographic issues like poverty levels, English language isolation, racial makeup. These are actually environmental justice neighborhoods as defined by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So the state itself has what's called a environmental justice definition written in its laws. And then we take those environmental factors and those demographic factors and we overlay them with tree canopy. So where are our trees? Where are they most needed for the people who live there? And that's where we target our giveaways, our plantings, some of our advocacy work to ensure that everyone's receiving the benefits of trees. Our Tree Urban Tree Corps program sort of takes the other side of the coin around workforce development. And we've developed a 6-week summer program where we train about 15 teens in the importance of trees. We teach them how to care for trees. Unfortunately, we don't teach them really how to plant trees because you don't plant trees in the summer because they're under a lot of stress. But they climb trees, they prune trees. And for the first time this year, we're running a school year program that's going to start in November, where we're going to teach teens how to actually do more hands-on stuff. And we're looking to expand that into hopefully a certification type of program or a training program in the coming years with some local schools where either at the high school level or at the post high school level, people are getting certified in the industry and then can be hired.
That's very exciting that you're dealing with the issue at hand and also making sure that the up and coming generation has those tools ready and available. Can you tell me some of the highlights of some things that Speak for the Trees have done in the last couple of years? I know you've got a lot of events going on currently, some things that you're really excited about.
So I think sort of crown jewel program right now, I think, is our Teen Urban Tree Corps program, which has grown from 9 or 10 kids the first summer who were just walking around in the summer heat doing tree inventory work, which was fun, but I think sort of repetitive after a while, into this really immersive, well, the second year was all virtual, but this past summer was an immersive program. And my favorite memory of that program was the last day of the program, the teens got to climb a tree with some trained tree climbers. And this is no joke, they climbed way up in the tree. And just to watch these kids grow from like shy kids who like were sort of like hesitant about trees and like weren't really sure why they were there to like totally throwing themselves into this tree was just really powerful.
Oh, I can imagine. How many of us, our first memories of trees are climbing in them or playing around them?
Exactly. So they got like geared up. I mean, I'm talking like they really climbed these trees. And then, some of the other programs I'm really proud of, actually just on Saturday, we gave away about 100 trees in Mattapan, and it was a beautiful day and people showed up with their families and got to, look at the trees and learn how to plant trees and meet people. And it was just a beautiful community event. And now people are sending us photos with their newest members of their families and they're, planted in their backyards. And what's there not to love?
What's there not to love? I mean, that's really forming, again, that individual connection with trees that ends up having a large impact on the community.
And it's amazing too. I think like what's beautiful for me is to be able to just be at these events and watch these connections happen, not only between people and trees, but between people who might never meet each other otherwise, right? They're really like built as democratic events. It's like, it's a civic space where you might live in Mattapan, you might live in Hyde Park, you might live in East Boston. Like, this is a chance for us to come together as a community. Or you might live like across the street and you might never know your neighbor. So how do you create these spaces where people are sharing in their love for their neighborhood?
Absolutely, which is what trees and parks and forests and all of that, that's part of what they offer us. So you obviously have a wonderful title for your organization. How did you come upon this title? How did you choose this particular title?
Well, if you've ever read Dr. Seuss's book, The Lorax, he's a funny little man who with a big yellow mustache who gets very angry that all his truffalo trees are being cut down. And he runs around at the capitalist who's cutting down all these trees and says, "Gotta stop cutting down the trees. I speak for the trees have no tongues." Not that they don't have a voice. That's what, when I went back and read it, I was like, wait, it's not that they can't speak. It's that we just can't hear them because they don't have tongues. And I think that was really intentional on Dr. Seuss's part. I speak for the trees have no tongues. And I think we just have to be mindful that they are communicating. I mean, we're seeing research from around the globe now that trees are communicate with each other in very novel ways, whether it's through rhizomal networks or mycelial networks underground or through different chemicals that they spread through the air. And they actually warn each other if there's an invading pest. And it's time for us to listen. And there's different ways to sort of be attentive to that.
I think you hit on something really important. We think sometimes when we don't understand a person, it has to do with a different language. But what you said is we need to be attentive, that it's not a language so foreign to us. It's not impossible for us to understand. We need to be attentive to it. And you also hit on, most people, when they think of the Lorax, they just say, "I am the Lorax, I speak for the trees." And they miss that next part, "for the trees have no tongue."
So there's this sense of redemption at the very end of the Lorax, that all is not lost, that, there is hope, and that action, that hope resides with us. And it's up to us. I mean, I think for a lot of people of our generation, and, the Lorax was sort of the first real call to environmental action.
Absolutely. And it was the first call that, often when we're faced with problems, we think it is too overwhelming. And the idea that a little child with a seed could make a difference and breaking it down into the smaller parts is incredibly, like you said, it's filled with a whole lot of hope, which you need in order to continue to face a problem and in order to continue to make change.
Yeah. I mean, I think with the climate crisis, so many of us feel disempowered and don't know what to do about it. And there are only so many electric cars and solar panels and things that we can sort of build. But even when we build that infrastructure, which don't get me wrong, is critical, I don't think anyone hugs their solar panel before they go to bed or is excited to watch their car charge, right? There's something about a tree that is intentionally personal and is a way for us to think about and reflect and care.
This all brings me to my next question. What role does story play in solving our climate crisis?
I think I think the pandemic, for those of us who were thinking about this before the pandemic, this has always been the case. But I think the pandemic has exposed this to many of us who are sort of on the sidelines on this, is how everything is linked, right? The linkages between all components of our system and our society, right? So for trees, for example, tend to reduce asthma rates. And when you have neighborhoods without trees, you have higher asthma rates, which leads to higher comorbidities due to COVID, like all these things. And I think getting back to your question about stories, it's like we all have stories that we need to share with each other that help us relate to each other and to our world. And one of the things that we've been really bad at doing as a people is creating spaces where we can share stories and hear about people's relationship to each other and build those relationships. And I think by doing that, we see by not being able to do that, we're seeing our democracy fray, right? We're seeing the threads of our democracy come apart. And that's not meant to be a political statement, right? Like, I'm not pointing fingers at one party or another. I think it's just like generally true. It's just we don't have a common discourse anymore. So one way to build discourse and build empathy and build understanding is finding ways to share stories, but share stories in a way where you listen to each other's stories without judgment. And I think a tree allows us, a tree is a witness that doesn't bear judgment, but is there bearing witness to history. And it's an object that is rooted in its space, and it's sort of witness to much more than any of us can imagine, right? We leave our home in the morning, we come back in the evening. The tree is there and witnesses everything that happens 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So what is the story there that it can share with us that will bring us together? And we can sort of find ways to use that as a space to carve out and share stories with each other that allow us to then see beyond each other or see, what our shared humanity might be. So I think often when I first started this work is wouldn't it be really cool to get youth to go to other neighborhoods and not see the other neighborhoods through all the awful things that are happening or, privilege on one neighborhood or pollution on another or whatever it is, but actually appreciate each other's neighborhoods through the trees as a way to sort of remove some of those preconceptions and share stories that way and appreciate each other. We're not there yet, but I do think that the power of a tree is that everyone has a story about it. So let me give you a couple of examples here. We had this really powerful webinar a couple of months ago for Arbor Week, where we invited people of different faiths to talk about trees and faith. And it struck me as I was preparing for this is that most major belief systems and religions have a tree at their core. So in the Judeo-Christian tradition, there's the Garden of Eden, of course, with this. I found out 2 trees in the Garden of Eden. There's the tree of knowledge and there's the tree of life. In the Buddhist tradition, Buddha is not only born under a tree, but I believe he reaches nirvana under a tree. In the Celtic tradition, trees have spiritual power. So there's something that brings us, we're connected to trees. But I'm actually convinced that all that intimacy with the tree is built into our DNA. Because I think we feel connected to trees because trees have always protected us And you think back to our ancestors, the primates, they all spend time in trees. And we're actually the only primates that don't spend any time in the trees. And I think what that means to me is that there's something in our DNA that actually yearns for trees, that we find protection in trees. You think about an animal, a primate that's under attack, it's going to scamper up to a tree and find protection there. So I think there's something genetic in us that actually finds respite and solace and peace in a tree. And that's just a universal human emotion.
I completely agree. I can think of the amount of times and I know for myself the amount of benefits I receive by interacting with trees. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. David, what are your hopes and plans for the future moving forward with Speak for the Trees?
We have dreams to really make sure that everyone receives a connection to and the benefits of trees. We hope one day to have a center where people can come and learn about trees, to have a nursery where we can go grow trees and people can come and help us grow trees and help grow the urban forest by taking those trees home and planting them. We hope to have a place where, as trees have to be taken down, we can take their wood and reuse it and build beautiful things from it. We hope to have a city where everyone is surrounded by trees. I use the tree as a space, as an object. Again, I call it a mediating object or a boundary object where people can meet and talk to each other and share in those visions and hopes and aspirations for their own future and for their children's futures.
I really appreciate that you think of the tree as a mediating object. And you also mentioned before, a tree is a witness.
Mm-hmm.
I think we both agree that there's so much more that a tree gives than many people realize.
There's this really neat term called a boundary object, and it was taken from a famous paper around someone who studied museum objects. And a museum object is a boundary object in the sense that people come and they each bring different perspectives on that object. So you can have, an archaeologist who looks at the object and can think of it one way. You can have an artist who comes and looks at it another way. You can have a visitor who looks at it another way. And that object is actually, it exists as a point of meeting for those people, right? Where they can exchange their own stories and their own expertise and exist on the boundary between many different ways of thinking and telling stories. And I think of the tree as sort of the boundary object supreme. There are all these people that sort of intersects on all parts of our shared urban space. And I'm talking here about urban trees, right? I think less so for trees and forests. So it is sort of this amazing boundary object. And the question is like, how do you bring that to bear? How do you find ways for those boundary objects to serve as a boundary opportunity? We need to really put aside some of our differences and think about how we're going to come together around this moment.
And embrace these boundary opportunities.
We're at a critical moment in determining what our future is going to look like, from racial justice to economic equity to environmental challenges to democracy itself. I wouldn't have said this 3 or 4 years ago pre-COVID, but it feels like a lot of things are at risk and we face a lot of challenges. And the question to me isn't necessarily how do we solve them all, which I think we can do, but how do we solve them all in a way that's equitable and that brings us together, right? Because I don't think we're going to be able to solve them all sustainably if we continue bickering. And that's part of the goal of our organization. Like I said, is it's a civics project too. It's you can't separate racial equity from environmental justice, from democracy. It's all interlinked.
Absolutely. How to solve them all sustainably in a way that is equitable. David, thank you so much. These thoughts are so rich and so interesting, and I'm really excited to keep watching Speak for the Trees and to keep talking about trees with you. Thank you for the work that you do in the city of Boston and with teenagers, and thank you for sharing your stories with us today.
It was my pleasure, and I'm just going to plug in our website for a minute.
Yeah.
So you can follow us. We're at Tree Boston. and we're also on all those fancy social media channels. It's trees_Boston at Twitter and Instagram. And yeah, we're growing. I mean, it's really exciting. There's a lot of energy nationally for this. I think we're plugging into something here that goes beyond just Boston, goes beyond just the United States. You're seeing globally a real renewed interest in forestry.
And I hope it continues. Thank you so much, David.
Yeah, we'll be in touch.
Perfect. Years ago, I moved to Chicago, Illinois, and took walks to better acquaint myself with the city. One day, I came across a park, unlike one I'd ever seen before. It was simply a square of brown grass, burnt from the sun, with a tiny baseball field and several benches, though none in the shade. In fact, shade was incredibly scarce. Just a few trees peppered around the edges provided limited canopy cover. I thought about workers who might sit on these benches during their lunch breaks on hot, humid days in search of some cooling shade, or caregivers rolling strollers to get fresh air, or children who might come and play in the park after finishing their school day, and how incredibly uncomfortable and maybe even dangerous it might be to do so. According to the Tree Equity Score website, the term tree equity is the idea that there should be sufficient trees in neighborhoods or municipalities for people to experience the health, economic, and climate benefits that trees provide. It sounds simple, doesn't it? But what are those benefits exactly? And why do some areas of a city have more trees and canopy cover than others? David mentioned American Forests, the oldest national nonprofit conservation organization in the United States. Their website states, trees in cities provide health, employment, and climate resiliency, benefits that everyone should have. They help fulfill our basic needs, such as breathing fresh air and drinking clean water. Trees also cool neighborhoods, which reduces heat-related illnesses and utility costs, and generate wealth by creating tree-related career opportunities. Much like buildings, streets, and sewer lines, trees are critical infrastructure that improve our quality of life. Unfortunately, the effects of the decades-long systematic denial of mortgages to people of color, called redlining, are undeniably visible across the country. Assessing nearly 500 municipalities, which represent more than 70% of the U.S. population, staff at American Forests found that neighborhoods consisting mostly of people of color have an average of 1/3 less tree canopy cover than majority white communities. Amelia Rose, executive director of Groundwork Rhode Island, has stated, "Racism and other forms of discrimination continue to play a role in where trees are located, which impacts the health and well-being of communities along racial and economic lines. The prevailing problem with having too few trees in an urban area is the heat. Some neighborhoods have so much exposed concrete absorbing sunshine that they become heat islands, which can be up to 10 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than nearby areas with natural cover. In the face of elevating heat, the Tree Equity Score opens new opportunities for effective planting. Its tally puts an exact number on the trees needed to achieve equity amongst neighborhoods, leading to better health and livability. On a brighter note, though not a hotter one, many cities have already invested in shade equity. In Los Angeles, the mayor appointed a city forest officer in 2019 to oversee the planting of 90,000 trees, focusing on neighborhoods that are lacking in shade. Also, Phoenix, Arizona has pledged tree equity by 2030. Planting trees has economic benefits as well. The study proposed that 228,000 jobs would be created, and that less polluted air may result in a savings of nearly $1.6 billion a year from things such as asthma-related emergency room visits. David referred to many resources that are available to learn more about tree equity, including the tree canopy map developed by Boston University graduate student Raquel Jimenez, as well as the wealth of information found on the Speak for the Trees website. All of these links will be in our show notes. David spoke about boundary objects. A boundary object is any object that is part of multiple social worlds and facilitates connection between them. It has a different identity in each social world that it inhabits. It was really exciting to learn about boundary objects because I felt as though I have always had a sense that there was such a thing, but never had a term for it. It's very exciting to have that term now and to learn more about it. That they reside in the interface between communities and can serve as a bridge between assumed and explained differences. David's explanation made me think that perhaps this podcast is a boundary object. Maybe that was our idea all along, to gather people and exchange stories and points of view to create a bridge towards finding solutions to our challenging world. The only thing that is certain is that we need to work together to find equitable solutions for everyone. The fact that you are here says that you also care. You are also concerned and know that it will take all of us collectively to continue to make change. I look forward to meeting you here in this space to speak for the trees, for they have no tongues. After all, as the Lorax implores, unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. We at Tree Speech and the Light Theater Guild are incredibly grateful for your support as we launch this storytelling endeavor from seed to sprout. If you've enjoyed our episodes, please like us on social media and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. To learn more about the trees and our guests, see our show notes and visit us at treespeechpodcast.com and on Instagram at Tree Speech Podcast. For more information about David and Speak for the Trees, visit treeboston.org. This week's episode was recorded in Massachusetts, on the native lands of the Wabanaki Confederacy, Pennacook, Massachusetts, and Pawtucket people. Tree Speech is produced and co-written by Jonathan Zautner and a Light Theater Guild. Please join us for the rest of our fall and winter season, and thank you for joining Tree Speech today.